I'm Dana Perino, and this is Perino on Politics. Cutting through the chaos, DOGE looks to tighten the belt, but will Washington have the stomach for it? Joining me now is former United States Congressman Garret Graves, and welcome to Perino on Politics, where I call up my smart friends and find out what's on their minds about the state of American politics. Garret, I would usually call you Congressman. However, I knew you before you were a congressman, and I like to sometimes explain to people, like, how does it end up that Garret Graves is my friend that I'm calling up to talk about politics? So just so everyone knows, Garret and I used to work on Capitol Hill before he ran for Congress and before I went on my way and then eventually went to the White House. His congressman was Billy Towson, and my congressman was Dan Schaefer, and they were very, very good friends. And that was back in the day when you had a lot of, well, I guess you still have good Republican and Democrat friendships, but there seemed to be a lot more cooperation then, and our offices got along very well. And so that's how I first got to know you, and it's great to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining.
Hey, thank you. And it's great to be with you today.
Thank you so much. Okay, so you were a Republican member of Congress for quite a while, so I'm sure you're watching all of this. And when you think about DOGE and the Department of Government Efficiency, the speed at which it's moving, sometimes I think in some cases I'm like, whoa. My grandmother always said, that old saying, measure twice and cut once. I'm not exactly sure that is what's happening in the haste to get this done. But I'm sure, just knowing you, that this is probably something that you probably wanted to do for a while as well, which is to cut government spending and get everybody back on track.
Absolutely, Dana. And I think you kind of have to look at the context in which this is happening. Look, we went through the last Congress where we had a Democrat majority in the Senate, we had a Democrat White House, and only a Republican majority in the House. And so in a situation like that, you have to look at the incremental wins. What can you get? And take those 2 and 3 and 4 yard gains and call it a win. Right now, President Trump ran on transformational change. And you have to do an honest assessment of the United States. And just to throw out one little factoid, if we are borrowing money, the rate that we're borrowing money right now, for every $1 we borrow, about 50 cents of it is going to go to cover debt service or go back into covering our debt.
And that's something that a friend of mine, I'm sure you probably know him too, Neil Ferguson. He has the Ferguson's law, which is as soon as that starts to happen, where you have over half of your money going to service your debt, your country will fail.
There is no question that is the trajectory that we're on. And Dana, putting the perspective of a business, if we were a business, we would have gone bankrupt and shut down years and years ago, decades ago. So is this a little rough? Yeah, it is. Is it imperfect? Yes. But you have to look at it within the context of the urgency we're facing. And this is exactly what needs to happen. Let me say it again. Are they going to get everything perfect, like your grandmother says? No, they're not going to. But the urgency we're facing right now, they've got to come in and do this. We're operating off of a 1950s government organizational structure for 2025. It doesn't make sense. This is a turnaround in a bankrupt company. That's what we need to look at this like. We have someone, Elon Musk, who has been very successful in business. Does it mean we give him carte blanche, that we don't look over his shoulder? No. But this is absolutely the aggressive effort that needs to happen. We are on an unsustainable financial trajectory. Is there going to be pain? Yeah, there's going to be pain. We're going to have to make change. But what you've got to look at it as the pain that we may be facing by cutting some programs today, or the pain that we are heaping upon our children and grandchildren with the unsustainable debt that we're facing right now.
We just talked about, well, we didn't have him on, but he was on, this is Monday, February 17th. It's President's Day. We had a show where Lee Zeldin, the new EPA administrator, I'm sure you probably knew him when you were on Capitol Hill. Of course, you served together. So one of the things he found last week was $20 billion in savings that he could make right away, because some of these programs that the Bidens tried to basically get in under the deadline before they were gone, it's just like, it was for climate for Palestine and things like that. And it is kind of shocking for American taxpayers who knew that the government was inefficient. But to have a spotlight shown on something like that can really irk you.
And Dana, everybody, every person in this country, every member of Congress has needs, has projects in their district that are high priorities, and to see tens of billions of dollars, Lee Zeldin is fantastic, good friend, and I'm confident that the research that he's done is right on track. He's identified these dollars that were being shoveled out the door irresponsibly. And again, what could you do with $20 billion in your community? How would $20 billion impact?
Or just not spending.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Like maybe as to the point about the budget. I am wondering about something, though, because the USAID funding, for example, some of it used to go to farmers in America, right? So there are some members of Congress from both sides of the aisle saying, wait, you don't want to hurt the farmers, do you? Don't cut that money. And then you had a couple of senators say, wait, you can't take the health funding. You can't take away NIH funding. And, oh, wait, what about the National Endowment for Democracy? It's so important. We can't cut. And then, so you even have some Republicans going, wait, not my program. And that's been a problem since you and I first started on Capitol Hill way back when. Do you think that the Trump political machine is strong enough, and I tend to think so, that even those members of Congress will have to back down?
Dana, I think that what they're doing right now is sort of like a stress test, cutting everything off and figuring out where you have real problems emerge. People are afraid of change, and you obviously have these institutionalists, these bureaucrats within the agencies. But wait a minute, I've been running this program for 20 years. We can't stop it. That doesn't mean that it's worthy of federal taxpayer dollars. And that this is something that's really important. There are a lot of missions, there are a lot of programs around the United States and around the world that have merit. It doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be funded with U.S. taxpayer dollars. Do I believe that some of these projects and programs that have been shut down are going to be restored? I do. I absolutely do. Are all of them? No, they're not going to, nor should they. All we've done, and look, in my time, either working as a staffer in Congress or serving in Congress, it is incredibly rare that we deauthorize or defund a program. All we do, if we have a better idea, is we heap a new program on top without ever looking at the efficacy or performance of the old programs. How great is it that we have a technologist like Elon Musk coming in, being able to apply things like AI and looking at the performance or efficacy of federal programs and deciding, number one, is this something that should be a federal program, a federal taxpayer obligation? And number two, is it actually advancing the ball, progressing? Is it an efficient use of dollars, or is there an alternative way where we can get this done?
So let me add to that, because the other thing we talked about today is that Sheryl Crow, great performer, right? So she has decided to sell her Tesla. She no longer wants to drive a Tesla in protest of Elon Musk. And she donated the money to something she thinks is going to get cut. And that was to NPR. And Brendan Carr is President Bush's FCC chairman. And he said, great, you're proving our point that NPR could be funded by donations, as it largely is. It gets a little bit of federal funding, not a ton in terms of its overall budget. But he was making the point that you might love NPR, and that's great. But that doesn't mean federal taxpayer dollars need to go to it. I think that's a good way of looking at things.
It's a great way of looking at things. Look, my wife donates to our local public radio station at home. I donate to our local Christian station at home. They're models where if something has value, then you can contribute. Why do we need to be federally funding some of these programs that absolutely have a private market that could be viable without the public tax dollars? Brennan is exactly right. He is going to be revolutionary in the FCC.
He's so good. I have a funny story. I have known him for a long time, so I've had his number in my phone. I haven't said this out loud yet. And so, he's somebody that I might have on the show one day, right? He's a friend like that. Yeah. So his name is Brendan Carr, and my producer on The Five is Brendan Coors.
Oh, wow.
And one of the things I have to do every day is organize with Brendan Coors what my one more thing is going to be on The Five. And several times in the last 8 weeks, I've meant to send something to Brendan Coors, but sent it to Brendan Carr. And my assistant, the other day, I copied her on it, and she wrote back, she goes, Dana, stop texting the FCC commissioner your one more thing ideas. He doesn't need the cat videos and the cute dog videos. And so I keep making that mistake.
Which one does a better job in responding to you?
I said I was sorry, and the FCC commissioner said, no, I love being in the loop. What are we doing today? Yeah, it's very funny. He's a great guy. And his wife's a super accomplished attorney as well.
She is amazing.
Amazing. I know. I think he married up, but I don't know if I would tell him that. The other thing before we take a quick break is I wanted to ask you about President Trump's idea. And sometimes I never know if he's serious about wanting to actually eliminate FEMA, or if it's just a way to say we have to rethink how FEMA operates, because it's not as efficient as it could be, and it's not getting the help to the people who need it the most for things like Hurricane Helene or the floods from this morning, the fires out in California. And I know that you know a lot about dealing with FEMA. Do you have an idea on how that could be reformed or what he's thinking about?
Absolutely. So one, look, in the aftermath of a disaster, you have to keep in mind, this means you have victims. This means you have American citizens that are in an awful situation. And we've got to have the government being able to quickly come in and respond. Do I think that FEMA needs to be fundamentally changed? Yes. I think they're right on track. FEMA actually re-victimizes these disaster victims because they're not efficient. They're an alphabet soup bureaucracy. They're not able to quickly get money out the door. And this is something people don't think about. FEMA deploys these armies of FEMA employees out there, which means they're taking up hotel rooms and taking up food that needs to be available for disaster victims. It's not the right model. This is one of the many things that I'm really glad that they're focused upon. And let's be clear, it's not to take away the capacity. It's to find a more efficient way of actually doing it, which means better, faster, cheaper, which is in the best interest of folks that are paying for it, and it's in the best interest of people that need it.
All right, with that, we'll take a quick break. And we are back with more Perino on Politics. Garret Graves is my guest. You recently left Congress, and I wondered if you could just share with people, what's it like life after Congress? You maybe have a little bit more time, but then that probably means you're also doing a lot of different types of things. I'm wondering what you are hearing from people or observing that might have either surprised you or concerns you or maybe even inspires you.
So it is a huge transition going from having your life scheduled in 15-minute blocks to all of a sudden not. It's like you stepped off a 100-mile-an-hour moving train. And so it's been an interesting transition, spending time doing speeches and panels and doing a little bit of consulting work. But the thing that has been so different is that I felt like when I was in Congress, I heard the good, the bad, and the ugly. And everybody had an opinion, good, bad, and ugly. And since I've left Congress, I feel like all I'm hearing is the good. And I'm not sure how much of that is because of the change of the tone in Washington and how much of it is because I'm out now. But the people that thank you, the people that tell you stories about little things that you did that you might not have thought that was that big of a deal, but ends up being life-changing for folks. And we did a big Social Security bill at the very end of my term. And I'll bet you every single time I go to a restaurant, a grocery store, anywhere, I'll have at least 2 or 3 people that come up and thank us for it and tell us about the impact it's going to have. So it's definitely a lot more positive that I've been hearing, which is really good. And I think a little bit more optimism for the direction of the country. I've
always felt that the country is not as polarized as the media tries to say that it is, and that Americans are actually quite neighborly still. Do you get that sense?
I do. And look, I think you have roughly, a quarter or a third of the country that's somewhat partisan on one side, a quarter or a third on the other side, and then you have that huge block in the middle that just want to get things done, that want America to move forward, that want the government to be efficient, and so I definitely think that people there is a huge block that just feels that the most important thing is for America to actually progress and not just to stand still because we're fighting with each other.
Do you think the Democrats will ever find their footing? I mean, obviously they will at some point, but it's been pretty interesting that they are flailing. And I look around and I'm thinking there's no one really stepping up.
They are getting zero traction right now. It is fascinating watching them try to take swipes at Trump and Elon Musk and the administration. But I think what it is, Dana, is that, look, there is a strong, strong desire for the American public, within the American public, to see our government do things differently, to see our government be efficient, be responsive. And Dana, one of the most important things that I don't think a lot of people think about companies that are transforming. You can do your banking online. You can order, new clothes and T-shirts or whatever online. They can be at your house tomorrow. But if you want service from your government, you're talking about weeks, months, or years. That growing disparity between what citizens experience in their private lives versus the experience they have with government, it's growing and growing, and there's impatience, there's dissatisfaction there. So I really think that the Democrats are going to have a hard time getting traction because there is so much support for what Elon Musk, for what this DOGE effort, for what President Trump is doing. And people want to see that transformative disruption, transformative change. And that's what they're getting right now.
See, it reminds me of about 3 months ago. This was before Christmas, but after the election, I said, I have to get this real ID done because I'm sick of getting the notices and seeing that I'm never going to be able to get on a plane again if I don't have my real ID by a certain date. And the dates seem to change all the time. And during COVID, they pushed it off for another couple of years, so we all blew it off. The trauma that many of us have experienced of going to the DMV is such that I dreaded this experience. And my husband helped me it is quite paperwork intensive. You have to follow the instructions. I said, I don't have time to go to the DMV and then have them say, oh, you're missing one document and send me on my way. I have to have this done and it has to be really good. So I dreaded it. I scheduled it. I make an appointment. I got several text messages saying, just making sure you know your appointment's at this time. Show up at 5:00. Here's the documents just to make sure you have all of them, et cetera, et cetera. I dreaded it. It was a rainy day. I walked in and I was ready to fight. Before I'd even begun, they were on time. I was in and out of there within 7.5 minutes.
Wow.
From walking in, checking in, paying. Believe me, that's the one thing the government can do. They can figure out how to take your money. The subway, you go down to the train, you pay. It always takes your money, but the subway might not work. But they know how to do that part of the technology. But it was super efficient. Yeah. And it's in the middle of New York City. And I was in and out in 7.5 minutes, and I couldn't believe it. And it was such a relief that it did, in some way, like in an incremental way, give me a little bit more confidence in the government.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, that is such a great story. It's so encouraging to hear whenever government agencies get it right, figure out how to adopt the technology and think about things from a consumer or citizen perspective. Dana, I worked in state government and led an agency. As you know, we met when you were working with Bush for a little while, rebuilding the levees after Hurricane Katrina and restoring our coastal wetlands. When I first got there, there just wasn't an urgency. And it became very clear to me after coming out of the private sector, there was no competition within government, none, which means your bureaucrat can be as slow and as expensive and inefficient as they want to be, and there's not going to be another one that's going to come in. And so you really have to think about how to force that competition or change that whole, sort of attitude within government and make them adopt efficiency, make them think about this from a consumer perspective, which is why I'm really excited about the FEMA effort. I think it's one of the areas where you really have huge opportunity for change, but I think that there's so many others. And it's just that lack of competition within government. It doesn't provide for efficiency, innovation, competition, and that's something that needs to change. But I'll say it again, it's great to hear about your experience in New York.
The DMV. So if you're in New York and you have to get your real ID, just if you have your paperwork together, it can work very, very well. The following week, a colleague of mine, I won't name him, I see him every morning, he went and he tried to get away without having one of the documents. And he's very frustrated. I said, well, you actually have to have the documents and then it will run smoothly. But he just doesn't think they should have to have all this information. I'm like, well, that's a fight for Albany.
Yeah, but Gutfeld doesn't have the reading comprehension that you do. You just can't expect him to figure it out.
I'll say it was my morning colleague, not Gutfeld. Although I'm pretty sure Gutfeld doesn't have it either. All right, we'll be right back with more Perino on Politics. And we're back with Perino on politics. And Garret, this is where I just ask one last question. What could I be missing? What are you paying attention to?
Look, I think one of the most underappreciated areas where we have huge opportunity for reform, it's got to happen, is in the energy space. During the Biden administration, you had the most irresponsible and reckless energy policy I've ever seen in my life. I mean, I've never thought bring back the Jimmy Carter energy policy, please, but I was even thinking about that. You saw prices go through the roof, which really replicated or compounded inflation. You saw us open up opportunity for countries like Iran and Russia to fill the void of American energy. You saw emissions actually go up in the first year of the Biden administration, and I think a little bit in the second year as well. So you weren't achieving energy security, national security, you were trashing the environment, and you were making energy unaffordable and driving up inflation. If the Trump administration gets energy policy right, with, I think, Secretary of Energy Chris Wright, the guy's amazing.
Yeah, we interviewed him last week.
He is great. I've known him for years. Super guy, really smart. So if you think about it, by opening up American energy opportunities, by opening up American energy sources, one, you begin taking away the international market from Russia and Iran. They are currently using those dollars that the Biden administration allowed them to profit from to fund the wars on Ukraine and Iran and Israel. So if we can dry up their funding by providing cheap, cleaner American energy, then you get a twofer. One is you get lower global emissions. Number two is you chop them off at the knees economically, where they can't continue funding these wars in Ukraine and in Israel. And keep in mind, Dana, our bad energy policy was funding one side of the war, and then our taxpayers were funding the other side of the war. It made no sense. Number two, by producing American energy, you're going to see lower energy cost, utility, gasoline, everything. It's going to drive down inflation. It's going to help improve the competitiveness of the U.S. economy. One thing people aren't really thinking about, do you know where that sanctioned Russian energy is going now? It is going at a lower price to China. It's dirtier, which means China's getting a competitive advantage against the United States economically. They're causing an increase in global emissions, and you're profiting Russia's bank accounts. Like, this makes no sense at all. So I think that this is one of the underappreciated areas. It's going to be an area where the Trump administration is going to be putting a lot of focus. They have got to get this right. We've got a lot of damage to repair from the last 4 years, but I think this is one of the huge opportunities.
And so we have a lot of moms who listen to this. And so for any of their children who are also listening in the backseat, hi guys, when their kids say, but what about climate change? What about the environment? How do you answer that?
I love it, Dana, because the facts show a very different story than we heard over the last 4 years. Number one, the United States has reduced emissions over about the last 20 years, yep, more than the next 6 or 7 emissions reducing countries combined. We've led the world. Do you know the single largest contribution of that has been actually transitioning to natural gas? That's the single largest contribution to reducing emissions. Under the Biden administration, they were so focused on deploying renewable energy in the United States. What happened was it drove up energy costs, which drove manufacturing production to other countries. So during that 20-year period, for every 1 ton of emissions we've reduced, China's gone up by 5. This is a global issue. You're moving in the wrong direction globally. So you can't just look myopically within the United States. Under the Department of Energy during the Biden administration, they showed this huge surge in global demand for oil and gas. Guess where you have the cleanest sources, lowest carbon intensity in the entire world? In the Gulf of Mexico. Yet the Biden administration...
How dare you? How dare you? That's the Gulf of America.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You're right. I apologize. Muscle memory, way too long. Been working on these issues, but the Gulf has the cleanest, the lowest carbon intensity sources of conventional fuels in the world. So look, am I saying we don't do new energy sources? No, absolutely. We need all of it. We need wave and geothermal and tidal and hydro and nuclear. We need solar and wind. We need all of it when it makes sense. But the greatest reduction in energy emissions in world history has been the transition in the United States led by natural gas. We cannot take all of these options, all of these tools away from us, as we saw during the last administration, because all that's going to happen is you're going to see global emissions go up. So let me be clear. I think that we have an obligation to lead the world on energy solutions. I think that carbon capture storage is going to continue to play a role where we capture these emissions. But the United States has led the world, and we have the opportunity to continue doing that while being energy dominant, as we've heard President Trump say. During the last Trump administration, emissions went down an average of 2.5% a year. Again, an inconvenient fact for so many people, while prices were down, while we were exporting energy all over the world. So we really need to return to better math and science, better policies that make sense from the United States energy security and looking at global environmental issues.
Well, I'd love to have you back, and we'll talk all about all of those issues as well. I would say that also for the kids in the back seat, when you are thinking about what you might want to do for a living going forward, and you're choosing what industry to look into, I do think that the energy industry for the next 20 to 25 years is where there's so much excitement, innovation, opportunity, technology from in all the different parts of the energy industry. So I'm a big proponent of that as well. Garret, thanks. Great to have you.
You too. Great seeing you, Dana. Thank you.
Okay, take care.
You too.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.